Hello everybody, my name is Karryshh and welcome back to another recap video. This time it's a Filipino horror Talahib. It's a story about a ghost killer who lives inside tall grass. The story was actually okayish and I think you guys would be better off watching this recap than the actual movie. But be the judge by yourself and stick around till end. On top of that, if you're new to my channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. It is something that helps me feel motivated. And now without further ado, sit back and relax as I recap Talahib. So the story starts with this eerie scene. We see a girl sitting in a taxi, but out of nowhere, the driver stops halfway and tells her he's not going any further. She has no choice but to get out on this empty, desolate road. And then, suddenly, a thug shows up, grabs her and drags her into this overgrown field with ridiculously tall grass. Obviously, he's trying to do something terrible to her and she can't even fight back. But then, out of nowhere, this guy in a cap shows up and without hesitation, he stabs the thug with a machete and kills him in the most brutal way. Blood spills everywhere and the girl thinks she's safe now. She looks at the man and thanks him, but then he stabs her too, killing her just like him, and his face was completely demonic. Now cut to the next morning, we meet two detectives, Bong and Roman. They're at the same field investigating cause two bodies were found there last night. No one knows who the killer is, and as they're looking around, something freaky happens. A girl suddenly grabs Bong's leg. However, the next second, she was gone. That's when we realize the field isn't just creepy, it's cursed. As they were talking, we find out that the land actually belongs to some super rich guy. He's been selling off plots nearby, but for some reason, he hasn't touched this field yet. Then out of nowhere, a man stumbles upon out of the grass, screaming that someone is trying to kill him. Bong and Roman rush over and try to ask him what's going on, but before he can even answer, something invisible yanks him straight back into the grass. Immediately, they pull out their guns and run after him, trying to help, and that's when, just for a split second, they catch a glimpse of the killer dragging the guy deeper into the grass. Bong and Roman try to navigate through it, but they keep getting lost, and eventually though they find him, and right in front of him, the killer pulls out a machete and then slaughters the guy just on the spot. Bong fires at the killer, but the killer vanishes. Now Bong and Roman were left standing there, completely clueless about what just happened. But that's not even the weirdest part. When they go to check the dead body, there was no blood, nothing, and looking at it, it seems like the guy has been dead for a quite long time now. Then they find a car nearby with another dead body inside. Bong immediately calls for backup while Roman checks the car. As he looks around, he finds a real estate pamphlet next to the corpse, meaning this guy was probably here to buy or sell land. However, just then, a man jumps out from the back seat and takes off running. Bong and Roman chases after him and Bong tries to cut him off by running through the tall grass. But the second he steps in, something starts messing with him. It was not just in his head. He can feel the killer's evil presence all around him. Freaking out, he rushes back outside and completely loses his chance to catch this guy. Meanwhile, the suspect keeps running and eventually hides inside this massive abandoned house. At this point, Bong and Roman were convinced if he's running, he has to be connected to the killer somehow. They finally manage to corner him, but when they actually see who it is, it was just some terrified teenage boy. Soon after this, backup arrives and the teenager gets arrested. It was already nighttime and the police were about to leave when suddenly a group of teenagers show up. The cops tell them to go home, but they insist that they're here to pray. Turns out, the girl who was murdered at the start, her name was Myrna, and she was the aunt of one of the girls in this group. Her name is Joyce. That's why they came here, to light candles in her memory. At first, Bong refuses to go along with it, but when the group keeps insisting, he and Roman finally agree to take him to the spot where the woman's body was found. They all get there, but instead of staying at the crime scene, the friends lead the cops a little further away, to a tree. They claim Myrna was actually murdered there and her body was only dumped at the crime scene later. But the way they were talking, it was obvious that they're hiding something. The group then walks over to the tree while Bong and Roman stay back, keeping an eye on him from the road. The friends start whispering about digging something up, but they can't do it with the cops watching. So first, they pretend to pray. Then weird thing starts happening. Serena, a girl in the group, suddenly flinches like something just touched her shoulder. Meanwhile, Patrick, another guy in the group, was trying to light a candle, but no matter what he does, it keeps going out. That's when Dia, another girl, starts freaking out, and out of nowhere, a tall grass grabs her leg. She screams, and when her friends rush to cut the grass away, they see blood pouring out from inside the grass. That's when everyone really starts to panic and Bong and Roman run over to him. Before they can even process what's happening, something demonic grabs Patrick and yanks him into the grass. The whole group sprint after him trying to pull him back, but the killer is dragging him deeper and deeper, and the only way to push forward in this grass was by hacking through the grass with knives. However, when they go deeper cutting this grass, blood starts raining down on him because the grass is actually bleeding. Bong and Roman were completely drenched in blood and they were at a total loss of words because they didn't know what was happening. Bong finally snaps and demands to know what the hell is really going on, and that's when the truth comes out. The group wasn't actually there to pray. They came here to find a body. Turns out years ago, their parents killed a serial killer and buried him right there under that tree. Ever since then, this field has been cursed, and now that killer's spirit is hunting down anyone who steps into it. For the past few days, the killer had been murdering more and more people, and that's why the group had decided to find his body and burn it, hoping it would break the curse. They were doing this because, in a way, it was their parents' fault that his spirit was still roaming. Obviously, Bong and Roman don't believe a word of it, but then the killer shows up. Before anyone can react, he stabs Dia and brutally unalive her. Bong immediately fires his gun at the killer, but nothing happens and the killer just goes away. Seeing this, Serena and another guy named Paul panic and take off, trying to hide in the tall grass. But it doesn't matter. The killer emerges from the darkness and attacks Paul. There, Paul tried to stop the killer as much as he can, and he made Serena run away. The scene shifts to the road where Bong, Roman, Joyce, and a guy named Timothy barely make it out alive. But the second they step on the road, all the blood on their bodies disappear. That's when Serena stumbles out of the grass shaken, and she tells him that Paul is dead too, which means 3 of their friends, Paul, Patrick, and Dia, are gone. The group tries to calm Serena down, but then the killer appears again. They all then run for their lives and hide in that abandoned house we saw earlier. Inside, Serena finally explains the truth. This killer wasn't just some murderer. In the past, he had slaughtered dozens of farmers, and those farmers, they were all relatives of their parents. That's when it starts clicking for Bong and Roman. Maybe this wasn't a ghost. Maybe the killer never actually died and had somehow survived all these years. But then grass suddenly starts growing up near the windows of that house, which means the killer was nearby. Suddenly, the killer bursts in and grabs Joyce. Here, Serena helps Joyce and she lunges forward, shoving the killer back and yanking Joyce free. Bong and Roman quickly push everyone away from the fight, and they themselves pull out their guns and directly aim it at the killer. However, that was not it, because Serena and Joyce then realize that Timothy is missing. Turns out, in all that chaos, Timothy ditched them and ran off alone. Now we see Timothy outside. He was sprinting towards the road, but his flashlight kept on flickering. Now just as the light dies completely, the killer reveals himself in front of him. Terrified, Timothy makes the worst possible choice and he runs into the grass. Back in the house, the killer had already vanished and Bong calls for backup. But when the officers arrive, they find Patrick and Timothy's body near the car. The scene shifts to the next day and Bong and Roman head to meet a guy named Stephen. They break into his house without permission, and that's when we learn Stephen is the same guy who was arrested at the beginning of the story. The cops speak to Stephen's father, who is in a wheelchair, but Stephen himself isn't home. Turns out he was sent to rehab because his mental state had deteriorated and he was an addict. Bong and Roman then drive to the rehab center and question Stephen, asking him where he was last night because the cops now suspect he might be the killer. Stephen seems like completely deranged and he starts rambling, saying that he killed them all and his father killed them all. Hearing that, Bong presses him and asks him if his father was behind those murders, but Stephen doesn't answer. Then the cops get confirmation that Stephen was at rehab the entire night, which means he's not the killer, he's just an addict and the things he said doesn't make sense. However, with the little conversation they had with Stephen, Bong now knows that something is off and maybe Stephen's dad is connected to all of this somehow. As they drive back, they get a call from Joyce and she tells them to come to her house immediately. When Bong and Roman arrive, they meet with Joyce's parents there, along with Serena's parents. But something was wrong. Actually, you see, Serena is now missing. Serena's parents don't want to involve the police, but Joyce snaps. She yells at them and tells everyone that Bong and Roman now knows everything. She says the parents need to stop hiding the truth because they were the ones who killed the murderer and now his spirit is killing everyone. Finally, everyone sit down to talk and the parents show a photo of the killer. Bong asks Joyce if this is the same guy she saw last night, but Joyce hesitates. She says the killer she saw had sharp pointed teeth, but that could only mean that the killer is a spirit. Then the parents reveal the truth and we find out that years ago they buried the killer alive, and this raises a terrifying possibility. What if somehow he survived? What if he's back looking for revenge? The only way to know for sure is to dig up his body and find out the actual truth. So now Bong takes this group to the burial site to search for the remains, and meanwhile Roman teams up with backup to go find Serena. At the site, they start digging near the tree, but suddenly the killer appears. Before anyone can react, he grabs Joyce and drags her into the tall grass. Joyce struggles and somehow she breaks free and runs for her life, but the killer was right behind her. She thought she will die, but then out of nowhere, Stephen appears and grabs Joyce from behind. At the same time, Bong finds Joyce and Stephen together and he pulls out his gun, demanding Stephen to let her go, but Stephen doesn't flinch. Instead, he reveals something shocking. He says that the killer's name was Edsel Marcinier and Stephen's father was the one who ordered his murder. The killer again appears behind Bong and tries to attack him, but Bong shoots this killer multiple times. But of course, the bullets do nothing and the killer vanishes into thin air. After this incident, Joyce was now convinced that the only way to stop him is to find his bones and burn them. And witnessing everything this much paranormal, Bong actually believes her. The group immediately resume digging and finally they hit something. A coffin. However, when they pry it open, everyone was shocked to see inside the grave there was no remains. Instead, they find Serena's dead body. Serena's parents completely break down seeing their dead daughter and they start sobbing uncontrollably. Then the night falls and Bong quietly tells Roman that he now believes that the killer's spirit is real, but Roman still refuses to accept that. According to Roman, maybe someone found out about their plan and deliberately placed Serena's body in the coffin to mess with them. Then the conversation shifts to Edsel Marcinier, the man Stephen claims was the killer. And then for the next few days, the police investigate Edsel's family. After a couple days, they finally manage to track down Edsel's wife, a woman named Flor. One day, Joyce, Bong and Roman stop her on the street and bring her in for questioning at her home. Flor tells them that Edsel disappeared years ago. One day, he just vanished without a trace. He never contacted her or their daughter again, and Flor lost all hope of finding her husband. But then one day, a box showed up at her doorstep. Inside that box were human remains, and Fleur immediately knew that they belonged to her husband. She then gave him a proper burial, but she never reported it to the police, and the reason was she didn't want to get involved in any trouble. Now here, Fleur did not know that her husband was a serial killer, and Bong and Roman decide to not tell her. Fleur has already lost too much, and there's no point in shattering her world even more. From Fleur, they finally learn where Etzel's remains are buried, so the three of them head to the cemetery. Their theory is that someone, one of the people who buried Etzel alive, sent his remain back to his family, hoping to give his family some closure and confirmation that Etzel was actually dead. At the cemetery, they find Etzel's grave and they pry it open and pull out a large plastic bag inside which they found his remains. Right then and there, they set the remains on fire, believing that this will finally put his spirit to rest. But in the distance, Etzel's evil spirit watches all of that and starts laughing. Later that night, Bong visits his father's grave and lights a candle. And after everything that happened, he finally believes in the paranormal. There he also makes a decision that he will never tell Fleur the truth about her husband. The scene now shifts to Stephen, who's having dinner with his father. His dad tries to reassure him, telling him that they need to let go of the past and focus on the future. Meanwhile, Joyce is also at home, having dinner with her family. Everyone is relieved, thinking that everything is finally over. She even has a little brother, though he doesn't really have a role in this movie. Later that night, Stephen was still terrified of the killer, so he keeps a gun by his side as he sleeps. But of course, the movie wasn't over yet. After everyone has fallen asleep, a strange energy surrounds Stephen. When he suddenly opened his eyes, he was no longer in his room. He was lying on his bed in the middle of that grassy field. He panics and gets up, grabs his gun and gets ready to fight. Slowly he moves forward, stepping into the darkness until he finally spots the killer. Without hesitation, Stephen follows him, waiting for the right movement, and then he takes his shot and shoots the killer multiple times. However, the bullets does nothing. The killer just smirks and says, "Thanks for setting me on fire. Now I am finally free. I can go anywhere. I can kill all of you wherever you are." Hearing that, Stephen's blood runs cold, and then in an instant, he wakes up in his bedroom, realizing it was all just a dream, but the gun was in his hand, which was real. But he doesn't pay attention to that, and without wasting any time, he grabs his phone and calls Bong, telling him that the killer's spirit is still out there, and now Joyce is in danger because the killer can now go wherever he wants. After this, Stephen ran out of his house and goes to Joyce's house to warn her. Meanwhile, Joyce is sleeping peacefully when she suddenly hears faint whispers. She wakes up and she was confused, but when she looks around, her stomach drops. Tall grass is now growing inside her house. Her entire home has transformed into the field of overgrown weeds. She realizes at that moment that the nightmare isn't over, that evil spirit was still there. Suddenly, the killer appears in front of Joyce and she panics and grabs a knife from the kitchen. She attacks him and then she stabs him repeatedly dozens of times, but the killer just keeps laughing. Then Stephen and Bong rush in and they're completely stunned when they see what Joyce has done. She has brutally killed her parents with the knife instead of the killer. When Joyce comes to her senses, she's horrified to see what she's done. She breaks down in tears, unable to understand what happened. But for Bong, it was clear. Because of the curse, Joyce had killed her own family. Her parents were one of the people who buried the killer alive, and now the killer is taking his revenge. Meanwhile, after witnessing all that, Stephen runs back to his house, and there he sees his father's body, because actually you see, the bullet Stephen fired actually killed his father, and he realizes that in the moment. Since the police was already there, the police arrest him. Stephen starts crying because he realizes that the killer spirit is manipulating people to get his revenge. Bong then arrives at Stephen's house, where he pieces together the whole story. The killer spirit is now targeting everyone everyone who had buried him alive, and it was clear that the spirit won't stop until his revenge is complete. In the final scene of the movie, we see Bong at the cemetery, placing flowers at different graves, which makes the viewer believe that maybe the killer ended up unaliving all the people who was involved in his murder, and this is where the movie ends. So this was the recap video on the movie Talahib, and I hope you have liked this video. If you have, then please subscribe the channel and give this video a thumbs up. I really need your support to grow further. If you want to watch this movie, there's a link to my Telegram channel in the description box. If that link does not work, just go to Telegram and put my channel's name in the search bar. How and when you can find this movie on Telegram will be revealed on the channel, so go join that. I'm mostly active on Insta, so you can follow me there as well, and look into my other channel where we discuss about the mysteries of the world. All the links are in the description box. For now, I see you all in the next one. Till then, stay awake, cause they always see you.